You know, Winona and I were laughing. She recently came to Hawaii. We were talking about this event and how we were going to be sharing our stories. But when I was sitting in the audience and I heard her say, naming several of you out there, how she had met you sleeping on your couches. Well, you know what? 35 years ago, that's how I met Winona. I went to work one day, came back home, and he was this Indian woman who was sick on my couch. I had gotten a call from the Protect Kaho'olawe Ohana. She had come to support us because they were using our sacred island of Kaho'olawe as a military bombing target. But she was so sick with the flu, she could not go on the boat. We didn't have money for a boat to take us to the land, so we went as close as we could, and then we jumped off, and we swam in. In the beginning, we had ropes, but she was so sick, she couldn't make it. They left her at my house on the couch. I came home. She was there for 2 days. She did not get up. She did not speak. Then I told them, when I found out who she was, I woke her up on the morning of the 3rd day and said, hey, you're coming to the doctor with me because you're somebody, and if you die here, I will never live through it. But, you know, this is how we began many years ago. And just recently, Winona has come back to help us with our trying to protect our sacred site of Mauna Kea. For many years, she helped educate our people about what GMOs were. Many don't know that Hawaii is the GMO capital of the United States of America, and in the top 5 GMO places of the world, all of the GMO corn and other things come from Hawaii. They have taken now and control the island of Kauai and other islands, other places as well. But with the help of our sister, we resist them. And one of the things Winona has done is brought in my vocabulary. As we oppose the GMO, we are bringing in the IMO, the indigenous organisms that replenish the earth, so that species that we have been told have vanished will come back. And this is how we're bringing back the silver sword in our sacred Mauna Kea. The land has been destroyed and devalued, but we're bringing back and mulching all of the endemic species that used to be there 100 years ago. And lo and behold, the baby silver swords are coming up. So now we know, fight the GMO with the IMO. You know, Winona, I wanted to ask you something you had said when we were talking to prepare for this, that you view your writing, you write really only about 3 topics, and they are hope, they are resiliency, and they are land. In many books that I've read and many of the articles that you've written, there's another thread that you didn't say. Maybe it is part of land, maybe it is part of hope, but the spiritual wellspring is what I'm addressing, and I'm so happy to see that the book that you are writing, that you wrote many years ago, about the spiritual practices of our indigenous peoples is now going to be reprinted. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. You talk about ceremony, but how is the spiritual wellspring in terms of your own practice, someone who has done the sweat lodge and many other things as well?
Well, I think that, you know, I am like you. I mean, you know, it's funny she's talking about Hawaii. So I have to digress. So I go there and I want to go help the Hawaiians, you know, but they don't tell me that the island, you don't get off like the plane with the red carpet. They don't tell me that. Kaho'olawe was bombed by the United States for many years. It's the Hawaiian island that you don't get to see, you know. But through their they've been worked many years. So 78 or 79 is I think when I first went there. And the first accesses were like 74, 75.
Yeah.
They started going there. So what they do, you know, Hawaiians are good swimmers. I'm a lake swimmer. I'm not an ocean swimmer. You get close, and then they basically throw you off the boat, and you have to swim to shore. I was like, you know, so my first time, I'm like, you know, I'm like in a panic, and then I look, and the Hawaiians are kind of like dolphins. They're like cruising along, you know, to get there. And that's when I think it was a great test of my faith, you know. I was like, pray hard, be okay, it's gonna be okay, just be with your people there, you learn from your people, you know. But I think I'm like a lot of people in the room, you know, in that I know that, that how we reaffirm, you know, they say that our native spiritual practice, I don't know, but they, you know, I think that they say native spiritual practice is a little distinguished from some other spiritual practices, more mainstream religions. They refer to those as sometimes as commemorative religions, you know, commemorating significant dates and significant things in history of those spiritual practices that occurred, and then the teachings that come from that. In our case, they say that our religious practice is often called reaffirmation religions, and that we reaffirm our relationship to place and to spiritual beings through our practice, you know, on a consistent basis. And so, you know, in my life, you know, a lot of what we do is founded in that, and a lot of our, you know, in my lifetime, when I came back to my community, we had lost all our ceremonial drums, and they were taken by museums and collectors, and one was up in the rafters of the Episcopal Church. And I saw in about 88, 89, I saw our first drums come home. And now of the 13 that were there, there are 5 that are there. And what I know is that in our community, whether it is those drums, or maybe it is our boulder, or maybe it is our people, or maybe it is our sacred items, when they come home, our people are better, you know? And I've seen that in my own life. And then I've seen, for people, some of you know me that I cannot say I'm a farmer, because I know that my friend Clayton and his wife Margaret are here, and Migdio is here as well. You know, those are real farmers. I'm a gardener, but I grow corn. And I work to bring back our old varieties of my area. And one reason I do that is because my father passed away many years ago, but he came to see me one day at Harvard, and he said, Winona, I don't want to hear you're a smart woman, but I don't want to hear your philosophy if you can't grow corn. And so I've been growing, but a lot of my spiritual practice, I would say, is also in preparing the foods for the spiritual practice. I grow the foods to make sure that our ceremonies have our food.
Yeah. The wellspring of our health.
Mm-hmm. That is also the wellspring of our health.
You know, I wanted to talk a little bit about the big battles that we're all in right now for sustainability, and the real question is energy. In Hawaii, we are considered to be the state that would be the state that would have the easiest time getting off of fossil fuel, that we have the ability in Hawaii to be completely energy self-sufficient. We have sufficient wind tunnels already identified. We have significant sunlight. We are a collective of small islands divided by channels. And despite this and existing technology, in all these years, we haven't been able to get a single project that generates energy from tide, wave, or surge from the sea. When I hear you talking about the fossil fuel threat, it seems to me that we're not making too much progress in trying to shift the energy paradigm away from fossil fuels. And it's even more disturbing to see what the state of Hawaii is doing now. A year and a half ago, we paid $4.40 for a gallon of gas on the island of Hawaii. In Hana, Maui, they paid over $5. Now everyone is so happy. It's back down to $2.80, and it's because of the importing of liquid natural gas. We have started to try to educate in our community what that means to people that live in the continent and to those communities, because fracking is destroying them, and we have yet to see really the full impact of fracking. I think when you take a look at what you're confronting there at White Earth, the pipelines, the day of the pipeline, you would think would be long over, given the fact that we now won the big battle. We really have convinced the world that there is a climate change crisis and that the polar caps are melting. But nevertheless, we continue to have this problem with those that are pushing fossil fuel energy and now saying that we can safely harvest the liquid natural gas. You know, it's a fracking lie, but no one knows it. So nobody knows it. And I was wondering if in your work you've found anything to address this. Well, I try to be positive when my work, and this is one big difference between the two of us. Winona is always guided by hope, but I don't know, possibly it's getting older, menopause, I don't know what, but I don't really feel like, you know, engaging in a positive way with these guys.
Yeah. I don't, you know, I mean, you know, to be honest, Hawaii is like one of the most difficult places, you know, because colonialism is, and its isolation and basically the rule of oligarchy, you know. It's not exclusive to Hawaii, of course, but it is pretty entrenched power. You know, to be punished for putting solar panels on your house is baffling. But that is the way of these utilities, you know, across the country. And so, you know, I wrote this letter. You can find it on our Honor the Earth website. It was in part inspired by my friend Ralph Nader, whose most recent book is called Unanswered Letters to the President. You know, and so I started this correspondence with Al Monaco, who's the president of Enbridge. And I wrote him a little letter. You know, I was like, hey, Al, I know you don't really know me down here, northern Minnesota. You're trying to run some pipelines down here, but I couldn't help notice, you know, things are not going well for you. You know, you had a $610 million loss posted on your balance sheets. You know, you're losing pipelines up in Canada, and this new guy, I think he's named Premier Trudeau, came in, not a big fan of a lot of things you're doing. Things are kind of, the writing's a little on the wall there, Al. You know, and then you're trying to run this pipeline down through here, and you know, you're having some problems here and there. You hire your Indian whispers. He hired 2 Indian whispers. They both got fired. I said, you know, the whispering is not going well.
Yeah.
You know, no Indians will talk to this company up in northern Minnesota. Or like, you know, we're suing them. They're not going to talk to you. We're not getting on. So, but in the end of the letter, I'm like, Al, it's quite obvious that, you know, your math is not good. You know, because there are more jobs in solar than there are in the United States now. There are more jobs in solar than there are in the oil fields. You know, the industry is growing rapidly and dramatically. It's cheaper to put in solar and wind than it is to put in new fossil fuel generation. Pipelines are things that they're called stranded assets. You know, it's like the little economic term. So you build something now, you spend $21 billion on new pipelines. That is $21 billion of junk that you're going to have in 10 years or 15 years. And it is, you know, quite clear in this country, you know, the United States has a D in infrastructure. We're a first world country with a D in infrastructure. You know, that is something that I cannot understand. You know, you have bridges that collapse. You have gas mains that explode in major cities. You know, we are a disaster in infrastructure, and yet we are looking at this massive infusion of new infrastructure that only benefits oil companies. And that is what, you know, to me makes no sense. You know, I'm not opposed to pipelines. I just don't like dirty oil pipelines. You know, I like water and sewer. I'm first world. You know, I like things that work. And so a lot of my analysis is really, like I said, this TP to a Tesla, these final days of the fossil fuel era, the final days of extreme extraction, whether it is at Oak Flats or whether it is in northern Minnesota, when they're going to take 1 million tons of you know, waste to get a ton of copper. That's what they're going to do. And the amount of energy that is required to get that bottom of the barrel copper is so immense that it requires a massive energy infrastructure. Enlightened countries don't do things like that. You know, obviously all of that was set up for the unenlightened. And the point is now is to accelerate the move towards an enlightened pathway. And that is really our work.
You know, when I look at some of the struggles that we were taking on 30 and 35 years ago, we still seem to be fighting to protect those sacred sites. We still seem to be fighting to roll back militarism. And I wanted to just say that, you know, from generation to generation, these struggles continue. But we cannot just measure our success by looking at where we are now, because there's been such a great evolution. And I really do think that there was a time when Indigenous peoples were so marginalized that our cultural practices and our spiritual beliefs and the traditional knowledge that we held that provide the solution for many of the problems in the world, that these things were really lost, that we could never reclaim them. But I see much hope in where we are now. You know, since the 60s, there's been a great deal of communication and a great melding between Indigenous peoples and environmentalists, between Indigenous peoples and those who are committed to developing green and clean energy. And so I see that there really is some kind of an underlying shift going on. We talked once, we were at the United Nations.
In the basement?
Yes, we were trying to find a place to do an interview, and there was no place, so we wound up somehow being in the gym of the YMCA.
Basement,
$3.
women's locker room.
Yeah, that's right, it was the women's locker room. We were there trying with this tape to try to record some of our reflections on this, and we talked about the fact that some progress was being made. I look at this now, and I'm really uplifted by it. We see more and more collaboration, and that's something that I wanted to address here, because we no longer can really afford the luxury of feeling that we can be isolated, that we can somehow step back and say, well, this is a problem. You know, there's this rioting going on now in India, and when you see it on TV, you wonder what is at the bottom of it. And then when the story is done, the rioting is occurring because there isn't any fresh water for people to drink there. And those kinds of realities in today's world are very close to us. We think we are insulated because somehow we live in the most powerful and wealthy country of the world. But when you look at what is happening with our energy, what is happening with our water, the basic things that we need for survival, we will lose it. And that is why it's important for us as Indigenous women and advocates to always affirm that we have to move forward with partnerships with those who may not be Indigenous, but having faith that they can understand that we all live on the same planet, that we all have the same requirements for our survival. And I do see some hope in that, although I don't see much in the current presidential debates. You know, I'm really kind of worried about that. But nevertheless, I think that we've made some progress, and I think that a lot of it, you know, is credit to your work. You know, there was a time when I certainly would not have worked with environmentalists. I couldn't understand why I would. Being a Hawaiian, Kanaka Maoli, our job is to work with our peoples. But it is a lesson that you taught all of us. And the thing is that we're living in a shrinking world beset with poverty and violence. And we're not going to be able to turn it around. We are too few. We need to bring along as many as we can. And we actually see now some positive change with the states, with the nation states, because the poorer states in the world are beginning to realize that they are Indigenous states, and it is their resources that are being removed. The extractive industries, now these are the primary reason for violation of human rights of Indigenous peoples all over the world, but especially in Africa, certainly in the Pacific, Central and South America, mining. The thing is that we all need to struggle against it. There was a time when we talked about the need to share our beliefs. And at that time, there was some resistance to it, but I see more and more now that there's an understanding, and those that are Indigenous and those that are not, that we have a lot of common ground. And I think that that's going to be a wellspring for our future. I know that you have had a great deal of background in working with the environmental movement, and I'm very thankful for the work that you've been doing with this slow food movement. It is actually helping us find and reclaim some of the endemic species of our own peoples that we thought were lost. And this is what has happened with our food, with your help and others. We thought that some of the traditional species of the corn had been lost to the Indian countries. We thought that the species of the taro, at one time we had 200, we only had 25 left. And this is what science told us. But of course, the indigenous peoples from the continent said, don't believe them. Go back to your traditional lands. Go back to the wild places. Find the species that have survived. We did it. We now have 85 species of the kalo. And I know that the Indian nations have found their corn as well. So we need to reclaim some of these things. And, you know, when I look at that, I think of sustainable food crops and what it does to keep us going. And it does go back to what you wrote in that book about reclaiming the sacred, naming it, identifying it.
You know, I think it's really the work that we all do. I mean, because a lot of anything I wrote is really a reflection of what I learned from people. And I've owed a great debt to the Hawaiians for, the many gifts that have been given to me and, and all the great food I ate.
With Indigenous, it usually comes down to the food.
Yeah, it does.
And the music.
And the music. But I just want to, in our last minutes here, I just want to say that, an example perhaps of, the alliance and also the moment and how you look over, years and see how things change. I was just in Hawaii a few weeks ago. I'd gone there, and this Mililani and I sat together as two women of a good vintage on her porch for many hours and talked. And I asked her to tell me many stories, because that's what I usually do when I go to Hawaii. But I've been following this case of the telescope, the 30-meter telescope. How many of you have heard of that story? Giant telescope on Mauna Kea. Brand new telescope they want to put up, their biggest telescope in the world. It does look like a giant eyeball. It's like crazy looking thing, And it's very similar to the story of the Apache and Mount Graham. The story of, I always wonder why the Pope needed a telescope down there. I never could understand why the Pope needed a scope. God. The Pope scope, yeah.
Yeah, the Pope scope.
Pope scope,
Mount
yeah.
Graham, I remember the Pope scope, right.
The Pope scope. So this is a similar story as a sacred mountain that now they want to put a telescope on. And the Hawaiians are done. They're done. They have been so abused by America. They've been militarized. Their land has been taken. They're covered with GMOs. What little bit they have left, what little scraps they have left is small. And then their political rights are stripped with things like the Rice Decision, which now allows non-Hawaiians to vote for Hawaiian trustees. It is really baffling how bad Hawaiians have it, So I go there again this year, and I go always to go pray at the mountain and go pray here, there, and see these people. And this year, there was this case where a lot of people got arrested, right?
Yes.
Trying to stop the construction crews for coming to the mountain. And, as a testimony to Mililani and many other great Hawaiian activists, this one young man stood up, what's his name? And in his testimony at court, he defended himself and he spoke only Hawaiian.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
That was cool.
Which was a problem we addressed several years ago. They forgot about it. We actually had a rule passed in the courts in Hawaii several years ago that we have two languages. One is English and the other is Hawaiian. But years passed and they never had a Hawaiian who stood up and addressed the court. And they just didn't know what to do. They had to stop the proceedings and find a Hawaiian translator. But our language has returned.
Yeah, see, their language has returned. And this young man, he's under 30, yeah?
Yeah, there were many of the young ones arrested, my nephew as well. But I think you're speaking of Lanakila Manguel, the youth. We were so proud that they went. And when I got the call I told my nephew, watch our back, and especially because the police were coming, and they always come armed. That is the only way they come. We try to not practice violence, and we're very proud that in Hawaii, in our struggle, we have not. We have had only one incident where the gun was taken, and the Hawaiians themselves went up and brought it down so that we would maintain peace. But you know, I got the call, it looks like the arrests are coming. And when my nephew was taken to jail, we went down to bail him out. I was so proud that he would be arrested for sacred site. I told him, you follow the footsteps of your aunties. Rather be arrested for that than drunk driving or something like that. And that's how it used to be with our people. Only those kind of criminal arrests. Now we are being arrested for the right reasons.
That's right. That's right. And so we are very thankful to the young people. Mililani and I will probably be arrested again in our golden age here.
But we haven't been arrested together yet.
We have not. That is yet to come, I'm sure. But I want to say, and it just as a last note, because she is a lawyer. She is one of the most renowned Indigenous lawyers in the world. And she has graced us to come here for today and join with us, you know. But I asked her for a story on this case because one of I call him my brother Craig, right? Craig Neff is also arrested, kind of the silent, stoic Hawaiian guy. Fair description?
Yes, yeah.
You know, don't really get out there. He's like, you go, brah. You know, he's like, cool dude, man, does all this stuff. He got arrested too. And in the defense of Mauna Kea, their sacred place. And Mililani explained to me that as Craig went up there in his defense, what is the defense called?
The defense is called the defense of necessity. Sometimes it's referred to as the lesser of two evil defenses. You never hear about it other than in law school, and when the case comes up where the police have shot someone and killed them. The necessity defense is a defense where you say, yes, I did it, but I had to do it. If I did not shoot this person, he would have killed another. And so I had to break the law. I had to do this in order to prevent a greater evil from occurring. And this is a very argument that they make. Many were arrested, but only 2 went to trial. And the first was Craig Neff. And when the judge asked him why he had blocked the road and obstructed the government operations, he said that he had done it in order to prevent a greater evil, the desecration of our sacred place, of our sacred land, something that we had to maintain, that he had no choice. The judge believed him. The case was dismissed. And when we went to the Supreme Court, and we told them that many years ago, we had come through the process. We told them, this is a sacred place, and we object to the development. We had a right to a contested case hearing, but the state instead delayed the hearing for years while they allowed 13 telescopes to be built on our sacred Mauna. If you go there now, you will see that there are 22 structures. How was it possible when they only had a plan for 13? Well, they Hawaiianized it. They put up a big Keck telescope, and then later they wanted to put 6 little baby ones around it. And when we said, hey, that was not in the EIS, they said, no, but we Hawaiianized it. The big telescope is actually a canoe, and the little ones are amas. They're outriggers to support the big canoe. Well, the Supreme Court threw that out, and that is where we are today. We're still waiting for contested case. Now we hear last week that TMT may move to another country. So quickly we're sending emails to the indigenous peoples in Chile. Heads up, because that's where the big telescopes will go. But I tell you, we will not allow any further. We will go for a rest, but we will not allow any further telescopes there.
So, you know, in closing, I asked her to tell you that story in part because history is made by people who do things now. You know, it is not made by others. And to see my my longtime friends and this man, Craig, get arrested and then use this necessity defense, which she explained to me has only been used successfully about twice in 30 or 40 years.
Yeah.
And
But we set the precedent now for sacred site defense.
And that the Hawaiians have set a precedent for sacred site defense in this case. That is really cultural expression and cultural freedom. And that is, what we are asked to talk about here. But that is also, as Indigenous women and as people who are in our communities and those who write about it or those who litigate it and stand for it, it is history that is being made today. So thank you again so much for coming.
Thank you so much. Aloha.
Thank you.